there's been a noticeable improvement to the air quality in the city.
The trial tipped to be the first of its kind in our courts.
People in England, Australia and Canada will be waking up going, what has New Zealand done? Has it done a good thing or a bad thing?
Modi said the scheme will not only reduce the electricity bill of the poor, but will also make India self-reliant in the energy sector.
199 200.
Hello and welcome to episode 200 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week on the show, Norway has been called an EV utopia. We dive in to find out why. Fun fact, their best-selling EV is the Fjord Focus Electric.
Therapists say that climate change is fueling a new kind of anxiety. To help combat this problem, we're going to start each episode with 20 minutes of deep breathing exercises. Okay, now, everybody, with me now. Breathe in. And breathe out.
20 minutes might be a bit long.
Okay, how about 2 seconds?
All right, done.
Okay.
Final details of the Chevy Equinox have been released. It's questionable how affordable it will end up being, especially since the fourth wheel is optional.
An angry mob in San Francisco has set fire to a Waymo self-driving car. Things really have changed. Why, back in my day, people rioted over sensible things like losing the Stanley Cup.
All that and a lot more in this 200th edition of the Clean Energy Show. How are you? You went to Saskatoon and came back with something extra.
Yeah, so picked up our Model Y in Saskatoon this past weekend. We did the FSD transfer thing, so they've opened that up again for a limited time. If you bought full self-driving in the past for a Tesla, you can get it now transferred to a new one. So we went ahead and did that and picked up the car, and yeah, fairly uneventful. But it's great. Model Y is great. It's obviously a very nice car, and it's very successful. There's a reason people love it. It's great.
Well, can you be more specific? Like, I know it's easier on the knees to get in and out because you don't have to do a squat to get down at a sports car level. But other than that, I mean, is it roomier? Is it drive nice? How would you say?
Yeah, it's just roomier, and you've got that higher seating position, so the visibility is a little nicer. And, it's just always great to have a new car. It's got that new car smell, like everything is clean and
nice.
And perfect.
The last time it'll be clean.
Yeah, exactly.
Till it shows up at your detail guy again. Well, that's nice. And, wow, I can't wait to have a drive in. I've never been in a Model Y. Never even sat in one for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah. I wanted to mention the Fisker Ocean really quickly. So Fisker is an American car company that they sort of had an expensive luxury car out before, but they've been, talking about their kind of affordable, I mean, it's still kind of expensive, but affordable SUV. So it's now out, the Fisker Ocean. And I just wanted to mention it because MKBHD had a review of it on YouTube, Marquez Brownlee. And he called it the worst car I've ever reviewed.
Yeah.
Did you watch that?
I did, and I saw the title, and it drew me in, and of course, I knew. I thought it might be a VinFast, but it's the Fisker. So
yeah.
But he always has nice things to say. He should be Canadian. He's always got nice things to say and say, well, they can improve this. Then it's possible that they could come back with the software over the air or an update and improve these things.
Yeah, it seemed unnecessarily mean because it's, I don't know, it looked great. Like, it's a great looking car. The paint job is amazing. It's got some cool hardware things, like it's got a center screen that's kind of like the Ford Mustang Mach-E where it's vertical, but then you can rotate it. It actually rotates to horizontal. That was cool. And it's got solar panels in the glass roof, which can then retract like a sunroof. So again, I thought that was kind of cool. So the glass roof, it lets sunlight through because, like a lot of solar panels, they're not fully, translucent or opaque. So I thought that was great. So, but basically the software is terrible. So it seems like great hardware, bad software. But, at least it doesn't run on gasoline. So I thought his headline was a little mean. Like, it's 2024. Cars shouldn't run on gasoline. That's really the main criticism I've got.
That's true. Did you happen to try the FSD, the full self-driving software on your new car and see if it was transferred successfully?
It was definitely transferred successfully, but we didn't really.
The hardware is the same, though, right? It's not going to be an improvement in any.
Yeah,
okay.
I believe the hardware is the same. So it just ends up saving you a bit of money because you don't have to buy then like enhanced autopilot, which is probably what we would have got was enhanced autopilot rather than the full FSD. But yeah. So we're going to have to sell our Model 3 soon.
Is your son the electrician using the Model 3 out of town, or do you have 3 Teslas in your driveway right now?
We have 3 in the driveway, yeah. We're going to sell the...
Doesn't that draw attention?
It's a little embarrassing, yeah. But we'll be selling the Model 3 sometime soon.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Also, this week's show, European automakers are teaming up to fight the Chinese invasion of automotive cheaper cars. India is going to put solar panels on 10 million homes and spend many billions of dollars doing so because it will be helping the poor in part, as so they claim. If anybody, if y'all, well, I got to ask you this. You went with the Model Y because you wanted, well, it was a good price. Right? It was the same as the Model 3 for some reason. The starting prices were the same when I looked it up in Canada.
I guess, yeah, the prices have come down a bit, so it's not as prohibitive.
Well, how could they be the same? There was always a major, extra expense to get the Y. How could they be the same? Has the 3 gone up, or is there's just, everybody's clamoring for the revised 3 right now?
Yeah, that's right. So they recently refreshed the Model 3. So there's kind of new demand for that again, because it seems like quite a serious improvement. So yeah, usually the Model 3 would be priced below the Y, but currently the starting price is the same because people want that new refreshed Model 3.
Well, it seems like a good time to buy then. And they had some right on the lot, which is unusual for you because you've never bought off the lot before.
Yeah, no, the first Tesla, we had to wait about 4 or 5 months for it. And then the next one was a couple of months, got interrupted because it got hailed on in Calgary. And so we had to get a different one, et cetera. But yeah, and we're going to talk about this a bit later when we talk about Europe, but, EV production is starting to catch up a little bit to EV demand. So it's not as long typically to wait for an EV.
Right. Well, I wondered why you didn't go with an Ioniq 5 or an EV6 so that, figured your calculations. Were you thinking about it?
Yeah, it mostly wasn't my choice. It's really my partner's car, so it was really her choice. So that's what she went with. She's now familiar with Teslas and how they work, so I think that was a big part of it. Having to learn a new operating system for a new car, which in this technological age would be a little bit annoying. And of course, the charging network. It's just a no-brainer. If you're going with an EV, Tesla is still kind of the kind of default choice. So yeah.
Speaking of charging networks, if you watch our other social media channels closely, you'll know that I was ecstatic this week. Ecstatic. Because my Bolt just got better. My Chevy Bolt EV that we've had since the spring, it got better. And Bolts don't usually get better, Brian. The only way they get better is a massive battery recall, and then you get a new battery if you've owned it for 5 years, and that's pretty cool. It's not cool having only, your battery restricted to 80% for 3 years like some people are. But yeah, that's cool. It's plug and charge. So I could not believe, I was looking through an American Facebook page of the Bolt, and because that shows up in my Facebook feed a lot, and I learn a lot of what's going on. I learn some of the bad things too. But I noticed somebody unrelated posted a picture of their app, and it showed the Canadian Flow network. Brian and I are in Canada, if you're new to the show, and we don't have a lot of options. There's been plug and charge for the Bolt in the States for a while, for a couple of networks. EVgo is one. I think ChargePoint is another. We don't really have charge points where we are. We kind of have some level 2s in BC, I noticed. Not too many level 3s there. I didn't have to set anything up. All I had to do was say activate in my app, my Chevy app, and then it takes me to the Flow page, which is the network in Canada. It's also in the States, but it's mostly in Canada right now, and it's the one I love because it works the most and it's simple, and I've talked to them on the phone a few times. And I just entered my information, username and password, and bada bing, bada boom, it knew my VIN number. And by knowing my VIN number, which I couldn't believe it did from previous charging. You often don't think about what's going back and forth on non-Tesla vehicles, but it actually did have my VIN number. So all I had to do is that, and it worked. Like I went to the local dealership and plugged it in, and it worked. Yeah. And then I went to another one and plugged it in, and it worked. Because, I'm thinking back to the tension I had during my trip to the West Coast last summer. I was always like, what should I do? Should I plug it in first? Do I swipe first? Do I use the app? Do I use a credit card? What do I use my my little RFID card that they gave me for Flow? What's the best way to do this? And it's just like Tesla now. You just plug it in. Now, it's a 42-second wait or 39-second on one of my trials, but that's a little slower than what I understand Teslas do. But it only took 9 seconds to identify and approve the car. The rest is a handshake. So it might be the way the bolt is for, finding out what charge it's going to accept.
And presumably you had to put in a credit card or something too?
Well, I already had one on my Flow account because...
so it's because it's through Flow,
So I think it's set up to renew $20 at a time. So if I use all my money, then it says, okay, we've charged your account $20 for that much more. And, so I get emails and I know how much electricity I've used and things like that.
Yeah, I've noticed the handshake is a little quicker on the Tesla version 3 superchargers. Like it's only like 5 or 10 seconds. And now the version 2s, it's a little bit longer, like maybe 20 seconds or something. But either way, it's both pretty seamless. And now as long as you're using a Flow charger, it sounds like you've got that too.
Yeah, there's lots of Flow chargers around, and it's one less thing to go wrong too, because a lot of the times when people say the chargers aren't working, it's the payment system that's not working. So if they can just, flawlessly read your car, you still got to stick around for 40 seconds. You can't walk off to the restaurant because you want to make sure it's working. I mean, you can check your app, but you want to make sure it's working and plug it right back in again if it weren't, because that would be a major time consumer.
Yeah, see, I think because the Tesla ones can be so quick, 5 or 10 seconds, they must not check the credit card until later. And we did have a problem one time when our credit card had expired, but it wasn't kind of until the next charging stop that it showed itself. So I think it let us do the first one because it does the handshake in 5 or 10 seconds. So yeah, there's not enough time to check your credit card. So it just waited till we did our next stop to tell us, something was wrong.
Well, that's happy news for me. And what's next, Brian? My dream is that Chevy will send me a Tesla adapter in the mail for free, like Ford is doing for its customers. Yeah. But they won't. They're going to charge money. Amazing. I'm not going to buy it, but it would be pretty cool.
All right. So your charging anxiety is lessened, but a story here from Bloomberg suggests that climate change is fueling a new type of anxiety, say therapists. And this makes total sense if you think about it. Climate change is obviously a very serious issue. And what psychiatrists and psychologists are struggling with is exactly how to deal with it. So there's an example here in the article, like if a person has a fear of dogs, well, then there's a certain kind of prescribed routine that you can do to help people get over their fear of dogs. But no one is quite sure yet how to get rid of people's fear of climate change. And it's got an interesting sort of take on it. Like, psychologists in the article are saying things like, well, yeah, it makes perfect sense that people are anxious about climate change. Like, this is a very real and very serious thing. And, sometimes anxiety comes from nowhere. Sometimes your brain just makes you anxious for no reason. And then other times it's tied to something. So this is the kind of anxiety that's tied to something. And that's usually the kind of anxiety I have as well. If I've got a big day the next day, lots of things going on, I tend to get anxious and
like the 200th episode of the show, for example.
I slept like a baby. I don't know why, but
all right.
Yeah, it's so there's a lot of interesting things in the article. Like I said, it's still trying to figure out how to deal with it. It says that climate denial could be a part of this. So there's still a lot of people out there that deny that climate change is a real thing, and it could be because they're anxious about it. It could be that it's a defense mechanism that it's to imagine that climate change is real is to imagine a lot of, very possibly bad consequences. So, if you just switch your brain and say, okay, well, climate change isn't real then, that's a potential way to ease your anxiety about it.
Well, coming up later in the lightning round, I'm going to talk about a survey that found out how many people are in fact denying climate change, and I have a different view of that, which I will give you then. And that view is that it's pretty small. And there's a small number of people who believe a lot of crazy things, Brian. A lot of crazy things, and I have the numbers to back that up.
But they tend to drive a lot of the conversation. But
that's true.
The article ends with, one of the notions is it does help to try and do something about it, whether you volunteer or donate money or something. And maybe we don't have any anxiety because we do a podcast. We've done 200 episodes now. So this is how we deal with
I have to tell you, it does help.
Yeah.
It does help. If you have a lot of climate anxiety, start a podcast.
And if you do a lot of reading around it, you will find a lot of the good news stories that we find. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole world isn't going to flood once the ice caps melt, but, the change is happening, and it's happening pretty quickly.
What I'm anxious about is the fact of how much the climate's already changed. I think of last summer where it was smoky and I had to close my windows. That's depressing as hell. I mean, there was other bad things too, but that's never happened before in my lifetime that I can remember. And it's just, I don't want to live in a world like that. The one thing that keeps me going as a Canadian is my beautiful summers. And, that's the only way you survive winter is to have that summer at the end of the rainbow, at the light at the end of the tunnel even. And if that's crappy, I don't know.
Yeah. And we did, and I think this helped for me, we did have to change our thinking around that because, we talked about this when we put in our heat pump. We've never had central air because it just didn't seem necessary, but then it seemed like we're getting more hot days every summer, but then it seemed we were getting more smoky days because there's been dry conditions, so we've got all these forest fires. So, we had to shift our thinking. Unfortunately, we could afford it. We could afford to put in a heat pump, but part of the reason was because of the smoky days in the summer, and we're expecting more of them this summer because it's still been dry. It's going to be a smoky summer again, but we can keep the windows closed now, so that's something.
But you've got a fresh air heat exchanger. Have you thought about how that affects it on a smoky day? Because I would love to have one of those. I should have one of those, and I don't.
Yeah. If you've got a fairly tight envelope in your house, if it's fairly well sealed, you should get something like a heat recovery ventilator to make sure you get fresh air, and that, should filter out most of the smoke as well.
It's got a filter on it?
Yeah, there's filters in it, yeah.
Okay. I thought it was just a heat exchanger, but you're saying that it actually does do some filtering. Yeah,
there is some kind of a filter inside of it. I'm not sure how serious it is.
I do have a air purifier, a major one that I found on Wirecutter recommended. And that goes off sometimes just when I walk near it for some reason. It's kind of insulting. It's like, what's up with that? All right. Well, CNBC and the DW, the German broadcast network, both had features out this week on how Norway built an EV utopia. The CNBC one was titled "How Norway Built an EV Utopia While the U.S. is Struggling to Go Electric." It's on YouTube. It's free. I highly recommend it. It's a little bit more than a half an hour, but it answers everything. It covers everything. It's well researched. It's fairly done. Yeah, I'm actually really impressed. It's hard to recommend something that, takes 30 minutes, but if you're having anxiety over what, the EV market will be when we're all driving EVs, well, Norway's already there. 25% of the vehicles on the road in Norway are electric. And 90% have a plug of new car sales. And next year, in 2025, they're hoping to get that to zero, except for vans, or will be accepted for a little while. But yeah, they've done all kinds of things all the way back to the 90s. You can see a chart here of all the different things they've done. And it's just, it worked. And people didn't scream. Yeah. I mean, some people scream, but for the most part, society has accepted it and been quite happy because, at some point, there's so many of them around that that they're not bad things. They're good things.
And because they started doing this decades ago, it's been a more gradual transition where I think like it's a bit of a struggle in the U.S. right now because, Biden and the Inflation Reduction Act, it's a fairly fast transition because, the U.S. was kind of behind.
Now, the Norway power grid is largely powered by low-carbon hydro, and they're adding renewables to that as well as they add electricity, and the hydro will be used as kind of the base load and even as a battery if they turn it off for a while and get some of the water. So this was the CNBC's reporter's first time driving an EV when she rented a BMW in Oslo. So that there was that. This is kind of quite a contrast to the story the CBC Marketplace did a couple of weeks ago, where they were looking for negative things. It seemed like a very different way of approaching this. So she had a few hiccups, but not much. The reporter noticed the quiet streets and the lack of fumes, which was quite amazing.
The streets are quiet in Oslo. The air is pleasantly free of fumes.
There's been a noticeable improvement to the air quality in the city?
Yeah, it is. So around 20% reduction of local pollution.
It was actually noticeable when a gas-powered car sputtered by. We did find a few people who still drove gas-powered cars. Some couldn't afford to buy a new car, and others still couldn't get past range anxiety for long trips, despite the abundance of chargers.
My son took me for a drive in his combustion vehicle yesterday, and I couldn't tell if it was working hard and not working well, or if it was just the combustion thing. Because he says, Dad, you haven't been in a combustion vehicle for a while. What do you think? And they said, well, I'm not sure. Is it working properly, or is it just always this way? So it's a different experience. Like you really hear those things working when you press the pedal.
Yeah, they can be kind of noisy and not great.
Also in Oslo and Norway, all the ferries, all of them are electric now. I don't think we've said that on the show. We've talked about them getting ferries, but all of them are now electric.
Wow.
And they're like a megawatt chargers that they pull up to. It's quite huge. And the trains are electric, and trucking is transitioning quickly to electric. And they're actually getting rid of subsidies for PHEVs now. That's the hybrids that plug in and have a little bit of all electric range. They're not going to incentivize those anymore. They're going to be treated the same as gas cars pretty quick.
Would you say that the environment is a very important piece to why people are buying electric vehicles here, or is it the price of the cars?
I don't think Norwegians are more environmentally concerned than other people. So it's the economic that is the most important. Climate emissions is, of course, a nice bonus and also important for a small group of people.
Yeah, I find that here, Brian, that we're all motivated by the climate, but really it's the technology that we're going for and the economics, right? I mean, that's very few people are doing it for the climate. I know a few, but largely it's not their first concern. It's a benefit. It's a side benefit.
And especially if you drive a lot, the more you drive, well, guess what? That's, a gas bill that you don't have to pay for, sometimes a gigantic one if you drive a lot.
In Norway, the restaurant chain McDonald's finds itself competing with gas stations, which they now, by the way, call energy stations, because they're just not gas. It's electricity. It's energy stations. So that might be something that we could look forward to the future, a name change. You may have heard it here first. Energy stations instead of gas stations. They still are operating on low margins. The electricity is a low margin, the same as the gas, but it's getting them in to buy the high markup items like a Coke or whatever.
Yeah, and McDonald's in Norway, it sounds like they've got chargers at maybe all of their locations.
Yeah, and Burger King has to compete with that. So, because, it's true. When you're on a trip, you want to stop where you can get a bite to eat. And I'm not going to be too discerning at this point of the transition, but I'd rather not walk 2 blocks to a restaurant if there's one, 50 yards away and it's a McDonald's. I'm happy to go there. They're not only fueling people, these restaurants, they're fueling the cars. It's a big deal now. And that's something we might be able to look forward to here. Again, this whole thing in Norway is like looking into the future. And, the grid is not collapsing, and there's not that many growing pains, actually. One of the biggest problems, I think, now is that they're finding harder to make grid connections for new charging stations because, there's only so much extra power in certain areas, and then they have to sort of, build up the grid in order to put a charger there.
Yeah, each district kind of has a maximum amount of electricity from what I understand. So yeah, sometimes in certain neighborhoods, you might be kind of reaching the max without having to do major upgrades on the grid.
Is it actually the gas station company, Circle K, that paid to put these chargers in?
Yeah, so the fast charging market is more or less fully commercial market. Circle K is one of the big fast charging companies in Norway, and also the biggest gasoline chain in Norway.
Are they going to be able to make as much money from charging as they did from gas?
Well, they don't have a big profit on gas either. Mostly it's also the convenience store where they sell food and coffee and drinks. That's also, of course, more relevant for EV owners because when they charge, it takes more time than filling up a tank of gas. So maybe they stay here for 20, 30 minutes. They can make money there as well.
There's a company called Rioters that runs this Esso station. We have a deal with them that we split the costs 50-50 for the whole installation here, but then we also split the income 50-50.
So yeah, they talk to charging companies, policymakers in the government, regular people on the street, even somebody who drove gas, to see why, and their excuse was they couldn't afford a car, they claim. Of course, you should keep your old car for as long as it's useful to you.
Yeah.
If you can. So yeah, they're going to take off the 25% VAT tax. They're taking that off EVs now, but they're going to remove that option soon because there's too many EVs. And they're allowed to drive in the bus lanes. There's many incentives that they had initially, and one was driving in bus lanes, but that's ending now because there's too many EVs in the bus lanes, right?
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
So, but now you have to have a carpool. So if you have multiple people in the car in your EV, you can drive in the bus lane. So there's no range anxiety, they say, anymore, but charger anxiety. Chargers not working sometimes, but it's much better now. And the payment systems are the biggest pain. So I say to you, Brian, why not have an Interac, like we have in bank machines and things like that, or a Visa Pay or some sort of ubiquitous payment system that pays a little fee to the other person, but you just have one payment method. That's what we need. I don't know what's stopping that.
Yeah, or at least tap to pay as a backup if the app doesn't work or something.
So here's a list of some of the interesting things I learned, and I did find it quite fascinating. Gas stations, like I said, are now called energy stations because the chargers are more important. Bad, I guess this is the pushing of the buying of EVs was too hard, the government says that, people were giving up because they were so much cheaper, they were giving up their gas cars prematurely, and that doesn't make it very environmental if you don't use your gas car for the life of it.
Yeah.
So that was something that they maybe are having second thoughts on, actually, which is interesting and something we can learn about in the rest of the world. Not letting the gas cars run out of their life cycle. And that encourages manufacturing, which is maybe unnecessary. So using less buses, this is interesting to me too, because people are taking cars instead of buses into the city because it's so cheap to operate the EV. It's cheaper than the bus. So they say, well, why should I pay a premium for a bus when I can go on my own little car, listen to my music or do whatever? So they have to respond to that by lowering the prices of bus transport. And they spend a lot on this, Brian, $800 US equivalent are spent per inhabitant on EV subsidies, which is a lot, but it certainly worked. The government is planning on phasing out new incentives because EVs are the new normal now, and they don't really have to make them the new normal anymore. Public level 2 charging used to be free when they started out, and that was a burden on the cities and the municipalities and paid for by the taxpayers. But now there's a small fee to use them. Level 2 is something that you charge into for hours instead of minutes. And it's usually cheaper because it doesn't require a big grid connection. It's something you can even have in your home. So 8% of ICE vehicle sales remaining to eliminate, basically. So it's 92%, I think was the latest figures, had a plug. And they said a lot of that has to do, that last 8% is people who like Toyota. And Toyota, as we know, has bugger all for EVs. They've got one that they aren't really pushing, and that's been problematic on its launch, like many of the other legacy automakers' EVs have been. Toyota's a strong brand there, and not really anything to show for it.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's brand loyalty in cars can take many, many years to change. And we all know that Toyota has huge brand loyalty. People love Toyota. And since Toyota's not offering EVs, that's, going to take some extra time.
Norway will end the sale of new ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, that is, if you're new to the show, in 2025. Vans are getting a last-minute extension, and around 500,000 vans are registered in Norway. This corresponds to 15% of the entire vehicle fleet, but 27% of the CO2 emissions, just like trucks are a small percentage, but a big percentage of, emissions.
Yeah. No, we know that vans are going to be a big part of emissions, especially in this sort of new economy where everybody's buying everything off of Amazon.
So the thing that I take away from this, for the most part, though, is the comments about the air. They call it an EV utopia in Norway, but the end result that stuck with me was this.
The streets are quiet in Oslo. The air is pleasantly free of fumes.
Fantastic. Okay, so from Drive Tesla Canada, Waymo vehicle set on fire in San Francisco. Did you hear about that, James?
Not until I read the script this morning. What's wrong with these angry mobs of people, Brian?
Yeah, well, we talk about this a lot on the show, is that it's not going to be a smooth transition to self-driving vehicles. And, whenever there's an accident, it makes big news. Of course, human drivers cause thousands, perhaps millions of accidents every year. But when it's a robot doing the accident, people tend to get angry. So, yeah, Waymo's self-driving car was set on fire in San Francisco. This was about a week ago as we record this, marking a significant escalation in public hostility towards autonomous vehicles. So this was a Jaguar I-Pace. This is an electric vehicle.
Thank God it wasn't a Bolt. That's all. I actually thought that when I read it. Because they pelted it with cans, the poor car. The mob was stopping for a street performance, and they pelted it with things. I hate peltings.
Yeah, so there was some kind of street performance going on, which caused the self-driving car to have to stop, because they usually stop before they run into people. But you know how these things work. Somebody threw a firework inside the car, setting it on fire, and this was after people were sort of banging on it and hitting it with skateboards and stuff. So, this is... I guess this is people standing up to the robot uprising, but, I think autonomous vehicles are definitely going to be a part of our future. And it's partly because of what we were just talking about. These are all EVs. Autonomous vehicles so far have been all EVs, and, those are cleaner and cheaper to operate. So they're going to make perfect sense in terms of taxis.
There's cameras on those things, right? They do know there's cameras on those things.
No, and of course, whenever there's a riot like this, there's always video footage of some kind, even if it's not from the car itself. People have cell phones. It gets on social media. So, it's a crime to set a car on fire, even if it's driven by a robot. So, typically speaking, people are going to probably end up getting some kind of charges for this, the ones at least whose faces are clear on the various cameras.
Yeah, okay. Brian, the Equinox EV is near and dear to my heart. Why? Because I'm poor, and it was promising to be a better vehicle for a low price, starting at $30,000 US. When they announced it in Canada, they didn't announce it, but when they said it's coming a couple of years ago, they'd started around $35,000, and went up to $37,000 approximately, they said, and then the price went away, which is never good. There's been lots of inflation and product shortages in the last 2 years. So a couple of weeks ago or so, they announced the American pricing, but now they announced the Canadian pricing. And it is supposedly starting at $35,000 US. But the range went up. They're not having a lower range. They're all going to be 319 miles, which is 512 kilometers. So it's pretty good starting.
Yeah. So the same battery pack for all the trims.
Yeah, and that's pretty good for an economical EV. That's really good, and maybe I'd like to think that's the new normal. The maximum charging speed is only 150 kilowatts, which is low for a new vehicle. But it's 3 times the maximum, roughly, of what my Bolt EV is. So that would be an improvement. Maybe overall, it would only charge twice as fast. The peak doesn't mean, depends what the charging curve is, because it doesn't stay at the peak, obviously. Prices also include the destination fee, which is like $2,500. So if you add the fact that that's including the destination fee of $2,500 and the extra range of 100 kilometers or 60 miles, then it's really not that bad. But what I don't understand is that the 1LT, which they haven't announced yet, they say in the United States it's going to be $35,000. The only difference is, heated steering wheel and heated seats and a front light bar, and it adds up to thousands of dollars, like $6,000-$7,000 for that.
Yeah,
that's the only difference. That can't be right. There's got to be. Because, I can go for $25 buy a heated seat, plug it into my cigarette lighter type thing, and it works just the same way, almost. It's not, pleasant looking, but it's there.
Yeah. Well, it's often difficult to even get the low-end trim on a car. Dealerships don't typically want to sell those. So, they can advertise a starting price that's really good, but then you get to the dealership, maybe they don't have those in stock. Maybe it's got to be a special order, and you get tired of arguing with them, so you end up, buying the heavier trim, even though maybe you don't need it.
Yeah, I had to buy $300 mats for my car because that's what the previous guy ordered, and he canceled his order. Oh, yeah. They're not worth $300. They're pieces of rubber. And I think we actually ordered our own for $100 that are much better. They're laser fitted. So yeah, it's in Canada, GM Authority, which is this GM blog, which is really has a lot of connections to General Motors insiders, and they're usually very accurate. They're estimating 41,000 Canadian as a starting price. But again, I'm skeptical because you're not going to knock off $6,000-$7,000 for those things. But if they do, that would actually make it cheaper than what the Bolt is currently listed for, even though they stopped manufacturing them in December. There's still some around, and that's the price is like 42. So it's a much bigger car and much bigger specs.
Prices have sometimes come down. I know there was a big announcement. The Mustang Mach-E has been reduced a lot in Canada. So we've hit that kind of demand plateau, which we're probably going to talk about in the next story.
So it's $7,200 between the 1LT and the 2LT for those heated seats and a front light bar. I mean, come on. There's something that GM is just, when you see things like this, something's not right. It doesn't make sense. There's something fishy about this, that they're not being upfront. I mean, Mary Barra, the CEO of Chevy or GM, said that they can't sell an EV for under 40,000 and make a profit right now. So in the States, I guess they'd be losing money again on this Equinox. But again, it brings people over. I mean, they go all the way up to 58,000. From the Canadian price goes all the way up to 58,000, which is actually pretty good because the American highest trim is 46.7 in US dollars, and that's 63 Canadian. But in Canada, it's actually $5,000 cheaper at 58,000. So anyway, it's just, if you compare it though, I mean, once you get pricey, if you don't have that 1LT that's well equipped, like in Canada, we often get the heated steering wheel and seats as a baseline option, right?
Yeah, like you would be crazy to buy a car in Canada without heated seats or heated steering wheel, at least in 2024.
Especially in an EV, when you use a lot of your energy on heating the cabin, you want to maybe...
It's kind of a given, yeah. But we do always have slightly different trim levels here in Canada.
And people think heated steering wheels and seats uses a lot of power. It does not. It's like 100 watts, 150 watts, and cycles on and off. That's not much power in an EV. That's nothing when you're using 7,000 on the, to heat up the car and the heater.
No, I think we talked about one time if you were stranded in the woods with an EV that you could run the heated seats for like a week or something. Did you figure out?
Yeah, over a week, 2 weeks even in some cases. I don't know if that would keep your blood from, getting the hypothermia level if you turned it on high and just kept heating away, but maybe it would. I don't know. Yeah, so the other vehicles, though, once you get to around 40,000, though the Y in the States, the Tesla Model Y is 45,000 right now. And what you don't really realize is that Teslas come fully equipped. There's not really different trim levels. The trim levels on Teslas are the performance of the motor, the number of motors, of the all-wheel drive. You got an all-wheel drive version, so it's got 2 motors, a front and a back. And, there's performance versions, of course, which are racetrack worthy and But for the most part, Teslas come with everything that you get. You get it in all the cars.
It's something I haven't thought of for a while because I've kind of taken it for granted now. But yeah, Tesla was really trying to disrupt the auto industry, not just in terms of the drivetrain, but yeah, you don't have to go through that rigmarole. And of course, they don't have dealerships either. So everybody pays the price that's on the website. You click the button on the website to buy it. You don't have to have a conversation about, should I spend $7,000 on the heated seats?
So the Model Y, however, does come with 100 kilometers less range. So it's actually fairly short range unless you buy the long range model, which you did as well, right? You bought the long range model.
Yeah, it's around 500 kilometers.
Yeah, but it's about the same price, and they're just not going to compare. Like, you're going to have the charging network, complete access to the charging network. We're going to see just how good of an advantage it is once they start making the NACS connectors in all these cars, the Tesla connectors, to see how much of the advantage it is to have a Tesla, to have the access to the network. For one thing, though, it's kind of pricey. So, for non-Tesla owners.
Well, one would think it's going to help once the other automakers can have the Tesla connector built right into their cars. That's definitely going to help. But yeah, the question is, how much is it going to help against Tesla, which has kind of become the default electric car at this point?
So the Hyundai Ioniq 5 standard range is 220 miles of range, which isn't a lot, actually. It's less than 400 kilometers, but it charges fast. It's an 800-volt architecture, allows a lot of charging speed, up to 350 kilowatts? That allows. I think it's pretty close to that. Now, it doesn't stay at that level, but you can charge the car from 10 to 80% in 18 minutes, which is, I don't know. It still needs a bit more range for us, though, in cold climates. But yeah, so you got that, and that's the same price as the 2LT, and I'm sure it's equipped the same, just less range. So I don't know, you're going to have to be a Chevy fan to buy this vehicle, the way I feel. In Canada, though, we got different pricing, and the Ioniq 5 is actually prohibitively expensive. But in the States, where most of these things are sold, and most of our listeners are, that's going to be the case there. The Volvo EX30, which is compelling, compact. It's SUV. It's 275 miles range. That's really good for $36,000. But of course, in Canada, it starts at $53,700, which is way, way too expensive. It's $5,000 more if you converted we're getting punished for being Canadian again. I hate it. I didn't choose to live here. I was born here. Don't add a $5,000 fee on after stuff fare.
No, we do tend to pay a little bit more. Okay, so we're kind of heavy on EV news this week. And so this next story is from Bloomberg. And they're suggesting that the European automakers are talking about possibly teaming up some more because they're really starting to feel the Chinese EV automakers breathing down their necks, as it were. And so Volkswagen, Renault, and Stellantis are thinking the unthinkable, exploring tie-ups with sworn competitors to make cheaper electric vehicles and to fend off their existential threats. So we talk a lot on this show about how at some point, it's going to be a problem for legacy automakers, even if they did it perfectly. A switch from gasoline-powered to electric cars is very difficult to pull off because you don't want to end up making cars that nobody wants, but you can't kill your gas cars too soon because those are the cash cows, and they're tending to lose money on EVs until they get them kind of up to scale. And we have reached a bit of a plateau in terms of EV sales. It used to be, you had to wait several months to get an EV, kind of no matter which one you wanted. They just weren't able to make them fast enough. But in the last year, that's kind of switched around. And, even for Tesla, this is becoming a bit of a problem. The slowdown has led to lots of discounts, as we know, with Teslas and other vehicles. And there's been a 20% share slump last year that has erased $150 billion from the market cap of Tesla. Yeah, it's because they're just not getting those sweet, sweet profit margins that they used to. But it could be we're nearing the point where this is going to be a real problem for legacy automakers. The example from the article here, the BYD Dolphin, this is a Chinese car. It's 7,000 euros less than the ID3, which is a very similarly equipped car. Volkswagen so far just can't make the cars cheap enough. And so they're kind of, working on a plan B. I thought these numbers were pretty staggering here. This is the number of people employed in the European car industry. It's 13 million people. That's just a staggering number of people employed in the European, car industry. And that's 7% of the EU economy is tied to these automakers. So the example that they used here is Airbus. So Airbus is a European company that was started in the 70s when they realized that they were kind of falling behind what Boeing was doing in terms of making large aircraft. So several countries got together to kind of pool their ideas and resources to create Airbus. And at that time, it worked. So this is a kind of a similar strategy if they end up following through on it. It's getting to crunch time, and if they aren't able to make some improvements and make them quickly, there's going to be real trouble for the European auto industry, and it's coming sooner rather than later.
The legacy automakers, they rely on auto parts manufacturers. They farm everything out. And they can't get together and find efficiencies that Tesla and the Chinese automakers have been doing. I don't know about how Korea is doing. They seem to be making very compelling vehicles for a price that is not high for what they are. But I think that, they've slowed down their EV ambitions because they got scared about the rate of increase in EV sales slowing down. It's still, high year over year, but the rate has slowed down a little bit, and it's anticipated to slow down even more this year. They're going to be screwed, Brian. This is not the time to slow down.
Yeah. And I don't have them in front of me, but there was a couple stories this week too about parts makers in Europe that are having massive layoffs because, everybody's struggling, and it's time to somehow turn it around.
This is via Energy Wire. India plans to invest $9 billion to power 10 million homes with rooftop solar panels, boosting the weakest segment of the country's booming renewable industry. So sluggish deployment of rooftop systems has cast doubt on India's target of almost quadrupling solar generation capacity from 73 gigawatts by the end of the decade. So Prime Minister Modi will seek to increase the pace of solar power rollout with a combination of subsidies and cheaper loans. The installations will also allow users to sell surplus electricity back to the grid, giving each household, and this is key, 300 kilowatt hours of free power every month. That's a lot. So he said this on a post on X. The scheme will lead to more income, lesser power bills, and employment generation for people. So this is interesting. There hasn't been a lot of policies to help poor residences in the world with solar subsidies. There's been some smaller grassroots sort of initiatives for the last 20 years even, but this is a pretty major thing because it's $9 billion to help people not have to pay for their power bills or, have more income in their house. So that's really cool. And I hope they expand that and they keep going. I hope this is a success.
Yeah, solar power can be an amazing thing to help people, especially if you're struggling with your power bill. But of course, there is a barrier to entry.
And it's that time of the show to dig into the mailbag, Brian.
Yeah, okay. We've got a letter here from Derek. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Derek, we heard from previously when he worked at John Deere, but now he works at Tesla in Saskatoon. And he wanted to mention that because he heard on the show that we were picking up our Model Y. So I'm just going to read the flattering parts of the email because I enjoy those the most.
There's not flattering parts?
Well, I guess not technically, but it is our 200th episode, which I'm very pleased about, an amazing milestone. I can't believe we've managed to do that many shows. So here is our 200th episode flattery from Derek. I just finished listening to your 199th episode and wanted to send a preemptive congratulations on 200 episodes. Hard to believe it's been 4 years, but you guys keep things interesting and exciting. I've tried a few other clean energy themed podcasts, but none have the quality, both sound and information-wise, nor the entertainment value that your show provides. You have a great balance between everyday layperson info and in-depth professional info that keeps your show intriguing as well as accessible. And then he goes on to recommend a book called The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. It's a sort of a futurism book. He says it's similar to what Tony Seba talks about in terms of how difficult it can be to kind of predict the future, but it's sounds like mostly good news. I've added it to my potential reading list, but I never seem to make much progress on my book list, so I don't know how I'm going to do. So I wrote back to Derek and I told him we were coming to Tesla on Friday afternoon and that he should come say hello if he was around. And he didn't say hello. He said he was too busy.
Oh, okay. Maybe he was starstruck.
That's probably it. Or, a fair weather fan. Maybe he's lying in these effusive comments. I don't know.
He doesn't actually believe that we're the show he says we are. I don't know. But anyway, thanks, Derek. We appreciate all who listen to our show, and it's cool that you've gone from John Deere to Tesla. I imagine the way John Deere is not electrified yet, that would be a big change. And
although we have talked about John Deere is making some big strides in that direction, which is fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Cool job. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Moment Energy announces a battery storage project at Vancouver Airport where retired EV batteries will be utilized to support high-speed EV charging. Did we talk about that before?
I don't know, but I've noticed we both, I was in the Vancouver airport, and I think we did talk about how they've got lots of signage around that the airport is working hard to get to net zero.
According to a new report by the Center for Climate Integrity, a nonprofit organization that advocates for legal action to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable, the plastics industry has sold plastic recycling to the American people to sell plastic. Now, a lot of plastic, most of it comes from petroleum. They've been lying for 50 years, Brian. They claim that there's evidence in this study that will provide the foundation for legal efforts to hold fossil fuel and other petrochemical companies accountable for their lies and deception. They're coming after you. The study now proves this, and it's going to open the floodgates of legal action, and I hope that happens.
Yeah, legal action is a great way to hold polluters accountable.
We've talked about California taking away solar incentives. Well, now they're introducing a bill to reevaluate rooftop solar net metering. The bill would require the Utility Commission to consider total benefits of rooftop solar, including improved local air and water quality, avoided land use impacts, and associated system cost benefits. Remember when Governor Schwarzenegger had his million solar roof initiatives? This was long before the show.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
You don't remember that? Oh my God, this was big solar news for us solar enthusiasts. Well, they're at 2 million now. I think that was at least, it's approaching 20 years ago, I think. There's now 2 million roofs in California have solar, according to PV Magazine. It's time for nuclear news. This is from the Cool Down. Government approves construction permit for new type of nuclear reactor for the first time in decades. This is a major regulatory milestone. Getting construction permits took nearly 2 years. The Hermes demonstration reactor will be built in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I believe it used molten salt as a cooling, so it's a different sort of technology for cooling. People are very excited about that. However, in Europe, the EDF, that's Europe's main nuclear power operator, they're from France, the majority shareholder in the UK's Hinkley Point C reactor that they've been building forever in Britain. They are trying to persuade the British government to help finance 2 flagship nuclear reactor projects in the UK after reporting a £12.9 billion euro loss. Write-down on the Hinkley Point, $12 billion write-down. Under the worst-case scenario, Hinkley could now cost $47.9 billion to complete. The initial, Brian, was $18 billion.
That
years
turned
ago.
out to be a lot more.
It has to fully shoulder the bill after its Chinese partner CGN stopped making payments to cover cost overruns as the British government took steps to push it out of the nuclear sector following a deterioration in relations with Beijing. And, this has been a huge cost overrun, but you know what? Greenpeace saw this coming 7 years ago in this clip.
The government is right to really review the evidence because there isn't a shred of evidence that this deal actually can go ahead. Everywhere that EDF has tried to build a similar kind of nuclear reactor, in France, in Finland, and in China, they're not working. All of those power plants are both over budget and behind schedule. And we believe that that's going to be the case for Hinkley as well.
Well, say what you want about Greenpeace. The spokeswoman was correct 7 years ago. And at that time, the UK government paused the project to rethink it, even though it was like years into the construction at that point. And with the government and the ratepayers paying the bill, the investors are on the hook for nothing. It's you and me. It's the government and that we pay taxes to that's going to be flipping the bill for this. This is how it works.
The bottom line is that the people will pay the price on their power bills because no matter how much the project costs and the budget balloons, the owners of the power project will be able to impose something called a strike price, meaning that even if the cost of 1 megawatt in a wholesale deal is £20 from other power sources in the UK, the government has to cough up £106 or more per megawatt for the duration of 35 years after the plant commences operations.
It's a CAS fast fact. About 80% of the global population lives in countries that are net importers of fossil fuels. And Jason Aquaman Momoa converted his vintage 1929 Rolls-Royce Phantom 2 into an EV. It looks like something Mr. Burns would drive. No, it's a bit beyond that, but it's 584 horsepower. Even old-time EVs rock now. And it's funny, I went to... when we were in Los Angeles on a vacation a few years ago, I decided we were on Ventura Boulevard to pull into a grocery store and just see what the vibe was like. And in there was this eccentric man who came in with this long cigarette on a cigarette holder. I've only seen that in the movies. As a sheltered small town Canadian, he had the cigarette on his long cigarette holder, and he was driving a vehicle just like that. It was such a weird experience. Or at least it registered that way with me. The Inflation Reduction Act is poised to save New Jersey electricity users $300 million annually from 2025 to 2032. That's Biden's climate legislation that most people don't know about as a new federal tax credit to keep existing nuclear plants running. So, yeah, he's paying the bill, and the state does not have to subsidize the nuclear. He's keeping them running himself. Nearly 15% of Americans don't believe climate change is real. Brian, I found that number fairly small. We were talking about that earlier in the show.
Yeah, and it is starting to shift. Sentiment is kind of shifting from, okay, climate change is not real to, okay, these climate solutions aren't going to work. So there is progress, but yeah, 15% not believing in climate change, that's a decent number, I think.
That is decent. And, they say it's become stronger because people see the effects of climate change. It's hard to ignore it. Certainly in the northern half of the U.S. that's got our smoke from Canada last summer and us, we know these things aren't normal. So I thought it was pretty good. 15% of Americans probably think their neighbors are lizard people. You know what I'm saying? Like from outer space. Like, and this is true, though. Here, 10% think the Earth is flat. Seriously, 1 in 10 people in the United States thinks the Earth is flat, according to surveys.
That one seems too high.
It does seem too high, but it's a different world post-pandemic, Brian. People are gone crazy. 12% think the moon landings were faked. 20% in 2021 thought it was true or probably true that the government was using COVID-19 vaccinations to microchip the population. 20%.
Wow, that's really high.
Mostly Republicans. The largest population of poor people after India is Nigeria. The main form of transport for the capital city's poor is 2- and 3-wheel transportation, rickshaws and motorcycle taxis. But the country is considering banning them, just as e-transport companies are starting to set up shop. They're thinking of banning them. Why? Because they say that the criminals are using them. And kidnappings are occurring on these modes of transportation and other crimes. New York City is considering a laundry pod crackdown. Laundry and dishwasher detergent pods made with polyvinyl alcohol, or PVA, contribute to plastics pollution in U.S. waterways. If approved, the bill would take effect on January 1st, 2026. That was on Bloomberg. Ford, as you said, cut the Mustang Mach-E prices. In Canada, it's actually up to $13,000 for their most souped-up trim and $5,000 for all other trims. And finally this week, in legal news...
If this was a death penalty state, you'd be getting the chair.
The Supreme Court of New Zealand decided to allow a novel climate change claim to proceed to trial. This is Smith v. Vonterra. The Supreme Court reversed an earlier decision of its Court of Appeal, allowing an individual plaintiff to proceed. This is one person suing these big corporations to proceed to trial with his claim against several New Zealand companies. The plaintiff is an elder of an indigenous tribe and a climate change spokesperson for a group of New Zealand tribal leaders. He alleged that 7 defended companies are responsible for emitting greenhouse gases or supplying products which release greenhouse gases when burned. Mr. Smith alleged that as a consequence of the defendants' activities, they have damaged and will continue to damage places of cultural, historical, and spiritual significance to him and his community in New Zealand, and we wish him well. That is actually a big deal that has been reverberating around the world because it's going to come here. All the places are going to say, hey, should we be doing this as well?
Best of luck to Mr. Smith. All right, that is our show for this week. You can contact us at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, and around social media, we are Clean Energy Pod.
You can find videos from our show on TikTok and YouTube, including special content not featured on the podcast. Have a look at the Clean Energy store for merchandise. It's there. The link, it's in your show notes. You can donate to the show financially like many people do. We appreciate you. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your podcast app to get new episodes delivered every week. And Brian, I couldn't believe that I had to go to the template for the script and change it from 1XX to 2XX. It's amazing. It's just bloody amazing.
Congratulations on 200 episodes, and we will see you next week.